Welcome back. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like. Enjoy the video. The courtroom buzzed with whispers and rustling papers. The air was thick with tension as lawyers in sharp suits shuffled their notes, their polished shoes clicking against the floor. At the center of the room, Judge Harris sat high on his bench, his stern face casting an imposing presence over the proceedings. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor and sharp tongue, he surveyed the courtroom with practiced authority. Suddenly, the doors creaked open, and all eyes turned to see a teenager step inside. Ethan, barely 17, clutched a battered briefcase with trembling hands. His oversized blazer hung awkwardly on his slim frame, a clear mismatch for the seasoned professionals filling the room. He paused for a moment, his wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar space before he walked nervously toward the defendant's table. Judge Harris arched an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smirk. "And who might you be?" he asked, his voice tinged with condescension. "Lost on your way to the school debate club?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Ethan swallowed hard but stood his ground, his voice steady despite the humiliation. "I'm representing my mother, Your Honor." The room fell silent for a beat, then erupted into murmurs. A teenager representing someone in court? The underdog narrative had begun, and skepticism hung heavy in the air. The narrator's voice softened, diving into Ethan's story. Life had not been kind to him. A sudden eviction had ripped his family from their home after a legal dispute with a powerful landlord. With no money for a lawyer, Ethan made an extraordinary decision. He buried himself in law books, studying through sleepless nights fueled by sheer love for his mother and an unshakable desire for justice. Today, he was here to fight for her and for their future. Ethan stood at the defendant's table, his hands steady now despite the sea of judgmental eyes watching him across the room. The landlord's attorney, a silver-haired man with an air of confidence, smirked. It was clear he saw Ethan as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Judge Harris leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Daniels," he said, his tone sharp but laced with incredulity. "You're telling me you believe you can handle a case of this complexity without a single day of law school?" The courtroom chuckled again, but Ethan didn't flinch. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and respectful, "the law allows anyone to represent themselves in court. I've spent months preparing for this, and I'm ready to proceed." A flicker of surprise crossed the judge's face, but he quickly masked it. "Very well. Let's see what you've got." Ethan stepped into the spotlight, his nerves melting away as he dove into his arguments with clarity and precision. He outlined the timeline of events leading to his family's eviction. He cited statutes and precedents, his words calm and measured at first. The courtroom listened politely, some still unconvinced. But as Ethan began to connect dots no one else had noticed, heads started nodding in acknowledgement. Even Judge Harris seemed caught off guard. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger against his chin as Ethan skillfully highlighted inconsistencies in the landlord's claims. Then came the bombshell. Ethan presented evidence suggesting that a key document submitted by the landlord had been forged. The room fell into stunned silence. The opposing attorney fumbled for words, unable to counter Ethan's airtight arguments. Judge Harris, once amused, now regarded Ethan with a mix of respect and curiosity. The teenager had turned the tide, leaving everyone wondering what he'd reveal next. Ethan's voice rang steady and clear as he held up a document, its edges slightly frayed from handling. "Your Honor," he said, his eyes locking on Judge Harris, "this is the eviction notice the landlord used to remove my family from our home. But if you examine it closely, you'll find something troubling." The courtroom leaned in, curiosity piqued. Ethan pointed to a signature at the bottom of the page. "This signature," he continued, "belongs to a notary who retired 2 years before this document was dated." Gasps rippled through the room as the weight of his words sank in. The opposing attorney, once smug and composed, paled. He stammered, flipping through his notes but found no rebuttal. Ethan pressed on, pulling out additional records he'd meticulously gathered. "Here is proof of the notary's retirement date, and evidence that this document was fabricated to force us out unfairly. The landlord not only acted unlawfully, but with clear intent to deceive this court." Judge Harris leaned forward, his stern expression softening into something that almost resembled admiration. "This is a serious allegation," he said, his tone measured. "Let's see if you can back it up." What followed was a rapid-fire exchange as Judge Harris tested Ethan's knowledge. He posed question after question about legal procedures and case precedents, his intent clear to determine if the teenager's brilliance was more than just a fluke. Ethan answered each question without hesitation, citing laws and rulings as if he'd spent years in a courtroom. When the questioning ended, silence enveloped the room. Judge Harris removed his glasses and leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. "Impressive," he said, his voice carrying newfound respect. "Mr. Daniels, you may have a future in law after all." The courtroom was silent as Judge Harris cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between Ethan and the landlord's attorney. "After reviewing the evidence and hearing the arguments," he began, his voice steady, "it is clear that the eviction was not only unjust, but based on fraudulent documentation." A murmur ran through the room, quickly silenced as the judge continued. "The court rules in favor of the defendant. The landlord is ordered to compensate the Daniels family for damages, including the wrongful eviction and emotional distress." For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then applause erupted, filling the courtroom with a wave of emotion. Ethan's mother, seated at the table, covered her face with trembling hands before pulling her son into a tearful embrace. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You really did it." As the room began to clear, Judge Harris stepped down from the bench and approached Ethan. The sternness in his face had softened, replaced with a hint of a smile. "Mr. Daniels," he said, extending a hand, "I owe you an apology. I underestimated you, and I was wrong to do so. You've shown exceptional intelligence, dedication, and an understanding of the law that many trained attorneys lack." Ethan shook his hand, his face a mix of pride and humility. "I believe you have a gift," Harris continued. "If you're interested in pursuing law, I'd be honored to mentor you. The world needs people like you in this field." As Ethan and his mother walked out of the courtroom, the weight of their victory settled in. For the first time in months, hope glimmered on the horizon. Ethan glanced at the towering courthouse behind him, silently vowing to return one day, not as a nervous teenager, but as a lawyer fighting for justice. Here on Karma's Twists, we share the most impactful stories of karma and justice that the world needs to see. Don't miss a single moment of good triumphing over evil. Join our community and subscribe. Be part of the movement that believes justice always wins.